If you've been a fan of the channel for a while, you know that I'm holding in a joke, but for the sake of professionalism, we are not professional. But what is the reason why I decided to make this video? Well, my dear viewer, I am so glad you asked. The first reason is because there has been a mass, crazy hate train on TikTok and on Twitter of Jason Todd. Everyone is seeing the light. They see him for the potential man or a bum that he is. But the Jason slander on my TL has been generational because he has been taking L after L, and a lot of us just noticed. I don't know why it took us this long, but now we see him as a man who coasts off his own aura. But now he has a new redesign that is completely doo-doo water butt cheeks. No one wants to see it because it looked like somebody threw up on the drawing board. This is now his permanent fit, on top of the fact that he has performed quite possibly a gold split, probably the fastest, the greatest speedrun of all time, for having a character of his caliber get his comic cancelled, because this is an issue 1 then done series, which actually led to the sales skyrocketing because they wanted to see what it was about and why it got cancelled. And I know why it got cancelled. I'm sure you know why it got cancelled, but for the sake of not being messy, we are going to keep it as a if you know type of situation. But I was like a lot of people too. I saw the potential. He has potential. The bones are already there for a good character. I think Jason Todd's time as Robin was really interesting. By all intents and purposes, the worst Robin there is, but from a character standpoint, he was really fun. And just seeing how he contrasted with Batman's ideology was really interesting to see a Robin do, because usually we saw Dick Grayson as somebody who always fell in line. Yes, there would be moments where he would argue, but at the end of the day, until his eventual split off and him becoming just the new leader of the Teen Titans by himself in his little part of like San Francisco or Jump City or whatever, he was somebody who at the end of the day realized that both of them are very in common and they want the same thing. Jason sometimes took it up a notch, and granted, I know there is a bunch of Jason fanboys who would be like, and girls actually, because a lot of the fans I know are just simps. They just simp over how hot he is, and that is the performative fact of a bunch of like female and even male fans on TikTok. That is all they see these characters as, just a piece of meat. And this even goes onto Nightwing. Even though he is a fantastic character in all regards, there are still people who only see him as the hottest vigilante in that part of Gotham. But I digress, or going off topic. I don't even know where we were, so I'm just gonna make something up. Jason Todd, he has a lot of potential, but ever since coming back to life, he's had like 2, 3, maybe 4 good stories, and the general audience only knows 2. The first one is obviously Under the Red Hood. All of us have seen it, and thankfully or regrettably, they made an animated movie adaptation, and that is what has been carrying him for all this time. The second one is Red Hood and the Outlaws in the Rebirth era with Artemis and Bizarro. In my opinion, I have really enjoyed that run, the first half of it at least, the first like 24-ish issues before he goes solo. That was really good. Dexter Soy's art was also really spectacular there and gave us, in my opinion, the definitive look for Red Hood other than the Under the Red Hood comic series. And that is the second reason that spurred this on. I was reading Judd Winnick's Batman run. I've been recently on a Batman reread marathon for the past like 2-ish years, and I've even been reading a bunch of stuff that I have never read in the first place, really engrossing myself in Batman lore. And I just realized that Batman really is just the GOAT. And I've been reading Judd Winnick's run, and the first arc, As the Crow Flies, really surprised me. I really liked it, and it was a story about Scarecrow and the Penguin, as the bird-ish moniker might suggest of that title. The second arc, the most famous one, was the Under the Hood storyline. Not Under the Red Hood, Under the Hood was what it was originally called, and this is where Jason made his debut in the pre-Infinite Crisis landscape. I actually really enjoyed the comic. I do believe the movie to be better in terms of how it handled the ending of the book, because unfortunately for Judd Winnick, his book was kind of interrupted by the War Crimes Batman event, which was a sequel to the War Games event, which was already bad, so you could expect the sequel to be even worse. And then was also interrupted by Infinite Crisis because the final page was like completely changed so that it would coincide with the events of this Crisis event. A whole page that could have been used for a more successful resolution, but alas, that did not happen. Thankfully, we had a movie to fix those errors. And make no mistake, while I do admit that the animated movie is 100% better in terms of how it makes everything more concise and the way that it wraps everything up, I will say those little parts where Batman was kind of discovering resurrection and how the many people in his verse have done it before, because this wasn't a new occurrence, and in fact, a lot of it was happening very rapidly at the time Jason was brought back. But really, the love for Jason Todd was spurred by, in my opinion, comic historian God rest Benny's soul, because he had the ability to make even the worst dog pile garbage or even mediocrity sound like gold. And I was eating up every single thing he did with Red Hood, even those New 52 videos, because I know now as an adult that those books were garbage. Like, there was not a single redeeming quality to that book when it came to the supporting cast and how they interacted with Jason. And honestly, this is where the mess started when they decided to try to position him into the Bat family. Yes, this could have worked, but they're kind of like tippy-toeing back and forth over the line over where he should be on that morality scale. But he wasn't always like this. Let's go back to his origin for a bit, because this is where the true makings of a good hero or a good character was made. Jim Starlin, I know a lot of people like to hate on him, but this was the start of Jason becoming more of an independent character away from Dick Grayson and all of his trappings, to say the least, because he was completely identical to Dick in the pre-crisis era. Nevertheless, Jason had two mothers, and what does that mean? No, they weren't lesbian. Actually, it's much more tragic. The first one, or the biological mother, was she in Africa? No, she was in the Middle East. And here she was an aid worker, but she was eventually blackmailed by the Joker because she was doing a bunch of embezzling, and it led to her turning on her own son, and then in a sick, cruel joke by the Clown Prince of Crime, he ends up blowing up both of them. So it was all just a waste. It was for nothing. And in her son's final moments, he saw her for what she truly was. So was it really all that good? I would say no. And the second mother was Catherine Todd, the person who gave him his name, and she was a drug addict. Let me tell you, she was shooting up needles literally every day, and that led to her being comatose. It's very fascinating seeing a little kid talk about how it's been over a year since his mother's death, and now he has to be out on the streets fending for himself and doing a bunch of very immoral, irrational, and just illegal things, but all for the sake of survival. Back when he was taking care of his mother, he would bring her food, he would keep her warm and alive for as long as he could. There's even this one scene, I think it was either in the Outlaws Run or the Lost Days miniseries by Judd Winnick, but let me talk about that for a second. Imagine the stocks that Red Hood and Judd Winnick would have if he did an ongoing series, because Judd Winnick is already one of my favorite writers. I've been reading recently his Outsiders run with Nightwing and Roy Harper, and how that's basically a Black Ops Teen Titans team to coincide with the original Jeff Johns version that was kind of a conglomeration of powers between the OG Teen Titans from the Marv Wolfman era and the Young Justice team. I know that is a mouthful. I go more in depth in this in my Teen Titans video that I will link either in the corner here or at the end of the video. But he did a really good job writing superhero drama in a very mature world. This book felt like something that would be in Vertigo in terms of the maturity and subject matter that it was able to get away with. On top of the fact that he's already done really good Shazam, Superman stuff, really good Green Lantern stuff, really good Green Arrow stuff, so this would have just been another thing to his resume to make him an even better writer and much more fondly remembered. But getting back to the story, let's read it verbatim. So here he says, "You see, Mom, I hurt somebody today. I was getting his food. I know you're not hungry much right now, but you need to eat something," as she's literally passed out on a mattress in a broken down apartment building that might as well be condemned if it isn't already. And he's like, "Some guy came out of the alley and he tried to take it from me, from you, from us." Of course, that is the food that we were just talking about. And he says, "I just got so angry I couldn't think. I started hitting him over and over and over again until I started to realize my hands were full of blood. I caught my breath. I didn't want to do that. I didn't mean to." He pauses and he says, "Mom, am I a bad person?" as he cries. "I wish you would stop taking that stuff, the drugs. I wish you could hear me. I miss you." And the most sad and depressing and tragic thing about this is that he also has a father who's very much well and alive at this point. That is Willis Todd, the criminal who tries to work with a bunch of supervillains to make money, ends meet by being a goon. We are not brain rotted. Take your mind out of the gutter. I meant goon. Batman, Lego Batman goon. But the tragedy about all of this, I know I'm using that word a lot, is that he had two parents that could have been his support system. Two parents that could have sent him on the right direction. Yes, all of them were kind of in the gutter of Gotham, but if each and every single one of them decide to have a job for themselves, the job of, yes, I'm going to support you, you support me, and we just keep our spirits up and alive so that we're able to pick ourselves up and catch higher callings, all of them would have been in a much better position, even if they were still taking drugs. Having that connection would do a lot of wonder for a boy like Jason going through all of that trauma. But as you can see here, Jason isn't inherently bad, he was just dealt a very bad hand. And this goes both ways in terms of in-universe and the comic book scene, because there is a lot of meat on the bones that you could just pull and extrapolate from for your own stories. And unfortunately, ever since he put that bat symbol on his chest again, he's never been as quite compelling. The cheer arc from Chip Zdarsky being a clear standout, but what do I believe should have been done with Jason? Well, first, if I had it my way, he would have stayed dead. I know that isn't a valid option now, because he's been alive and breathing way too much for that to ever have an impact at this very moment, but I really enjoyed seeing Jason Todd haunt the narrative, and I really only realized how much of an impact it had after going on my Batman read-through. They bring up Jason a lot, but in very opportune moments for great character work. Ever since like Tim Drake and Cassandra Cain was added to the Bat family, those were two new kid sidekicks, or kid characters within the mythos, and they always had that Jason Todd death looming over their head because any one mistake would lead to them following a similar fate, and they did not want that. It even got so down bad in the Batman mythos that Jason Todd was mentioned verbatim with Bruce's own words, his own mouth, and he doesn't like to mention him, to Cassandra Cain when she was willing to do certain things that Bruce believed that would get her killed. On top of the fact that that display case, that Jason Todd memorial, was used everywhere, from the background to covers to even the focus of discussion. Wherever the writers felt that it would be an opportune moment, they would place it there, and it would be very emotional and impactful, to me at least. The impact Jason had onto his successor, Tim Drake, he would end up hallucinating him. There was this one time before he became Robin officially where he had an identity crisis, where he felt imposter syndrome and he saw the ghosts of Dick Grayson and Jason Todd. Quote unquote ghosts, it was just in his head, and he saw them kind of goading him and giving him that confidence needed to take the Robin mantle for himself, to realize the mistakes of both his predecessors and to become a better Robin for it. That impact there will never be held by Jason again, but there has never been one moment that I felt more than that one issue of Gotham Knights, I'm pretty sure issue 45, where a Child Protective Service agent comes to investigate and interrogate Bruce Wayne because they realize that something happened to Jason Todd, his ward, and everybody kind of just like threw a blind eye because then there was more kids coming in like Tim and Cassandra, and the CPS officer, the agent, was like, wait, this is kind of fishy. Somebody should talk about this. And let me read it to you right here as we go through the excerpt, because this is very powerful, because we see in real time Bruce's facade, his armor crack under all of those emotions. And you have to be very important to Bruce for that to happen, because this is not an everyday occurrence. This is proof to all of those Jason Todd glazers that don't know what they're talking about and who never read a comic book to realize that Bruce does care for Jason. Even after the death of Jason, he actually tried to kill the Joker, but Superman stopped him because it would lead to an international incident. Long story short, he was the ambassador of Iran. Don't tell me or ask me how that happened. Comic books can be very goofy, and sometimes you read it and you feel like you're taking shrooms. I have never had it before, but I'm assuming what Jim Starlin wrote on that page is similar to that experience. Either way, let's start reading. And it starts off with the CPS agent. If you want to read along, the little staticky thing is Bruce Wayne. That's what shows you that this is being recorded and that is his dialogue. So let's begin. He says, as I just said, can we begin? That's not gonna get annoying, huh? And then Bruce says, what would you like to talk about? I want you to talk about what went wrong with Jason Todd. I'm sure you already know. I need to hear it from you, Mr. Wayne, for the record. I bit off more than I could chew. I thought I could take the pain in Jason's heart and replace it with something better. I thought I could give him a reason to turn his life around. But he missed his mother? Yes. My own mother was shot to death right in front of me, basically bringing in those parallels that we already know that Bruce has with all of his Robins, at least until Tim Drake. Well, I guess his mother does die at the very beginning, but I digress. I'm very sorry. But Jason's mother was alive. She abandoned him, but she was alive. And perhaps that's why I didn't do more to stop him from scouring the Middle East to find her, because of the hope that she was alive. But because you wanted to give him hope in the face of hopelessness? I wanted what any father wants for his son. Hope, happiness, a future of never wanting or regretting something he could never have again. I just went about it the wrong way. I allowed him to have hope, and it killed him. And we see him slowly but surely break down into tears until eventually he has to put his face down and his hands cover it. And then the guy says, "I think we're done here, Mr. Wayne." I don't think I've ever seen Bruce like this, ever. This is what makes this so important and what makes Jason's death so impactful to the entire lore. This will never hit the same again. Nothing that Jason has done since his resurrection, or at least since post-Flashpoint when he became a good guy, has it ever been this good. But this brings me on to the second point on what they should have done with Jason, and that is keep him being an anti-villain. And under the Red Hood, what I really loved about him is that he took a very meticulous and logical way to be the antithesis to Batman's ideology. He says, yeah, you control people through fear, but what do you do to the ones who aren't afraid? You take them out. What do you do to the ones you can't take out if it's too big to actually fight? Well, you start to think outside the box. You become a crime lord and you control them by being on the inside. And here you have to remember, he is an anti-villain. He isn't an anti-hero because he is willing to fight and kill other heroes if they get in his way. But that doesn't stop him from having a code and from being honorable from time to time. And what I really love about him is how psychotic he can be. I know a lot of Jason fans don't like it like this because they think that he is out of character, but you have to remember, he is mentally traumatized and disfigured, he has brain damage, and he has a bunch of Lazarus Pit chemicals in his brain affecting it, and it makes him feel like he's on insanity pills. But this does bring me on to my next point, which is what makes an anti-villain special. They're only as good as their flaws, and Jason's biggest flaw, in my opinion, out of universe and in universe, is his kind of negative experiences and how he holds onto that very attentively to the point that it prevents him of thinking of the future and it keeps him in a loop. That is why he always fights Batman on his stances of killing and not killing. Brother, Batman has told you multiple times, if you're within a city, you do not kill. How hard is that to understand? But for the sake of meaningless conflict, he has to do it over and over again without him having any distinctive character arc or change for us to rely on. And this leads to him being very impulsive, very emotional, very vengeful. He does have a lot of rage within him, and this can get into the way of his logical thinking. Case in point, when he pulled up on Tim Drake with a full-blown Robin costume and beat his booty for the sake of just seeing if he was a good enough replacement, and why did Bruce replace him so quickly? And it wasn't even that quick if you actually went by the Alan Grant issues. But there is no reason for a grown man to wear a Robin costume. Tim Drake himself even asked him, do you want the Robin mantle? Because that is the only logical question to ask when you see somebody in tighty-whities at the big age of 22, 23. That should not be happening. But it did, and it was very entertaining. Psychotic Lazarus Pit Jason is the best because that explains his mood swings and his unpredictability. It literally ended with him writing in Tim's blood, Jason Todd was here, and then hand painting with his blood again on the wall right next to it. What a loser, bro. I love that though. Jason should be half badass and half loser, because it really shows you how he hasn't really moved on. He is still a broken kid at heart, kind of like Batman if we want to bring up parallels. Another scenario that I found to be really interesting in his anti-villain stage was when he was cosplaying his best Emperor Palpatine, and he went to the second Speedy, also known as Mia Darden, one of my favorite characters who goes very neglected. But he tries to get her on his side by bringing about all of these parallels between the both of them, saying that, oh, I was on the street too, oh, I did drugs just like you, oh, I was on a bad path because of my childhood. But that didn't budge. He tried his best, but when she didn't take the bait, guess what he did? He blew up her school. And granted, I don't think there was anybody in the school, it was probably like a weekend or something, but there was no reason for that to happen. That was so unprovoked of a crash out that I can't, oh my goodness, I'm stopping myself from laughing at this very moment, because what possesses a man to do that? Again, this is also just a teenager. You got to stop. And speaking of stopping, I gotta stop too. I've been speaking like, how long has it been? 20 minutes at this point straight? Dude, I need some water. Everybody here, go get some water. Go on a water break, because I'm telling you, you guys do not drink enough water. You need to do it now, okay? I know you're in your room, drinking your pop, drinking your Coke Zero, drinking your zero sugar. No, get some water, get up out of your chair, stretch a little bit. I gotta do that right now too, but I'm telling you, I'm not exactly the biggest Jason Todd fan, but there is this one study that was brought to my attention by this one person on Tumblr. Their name is BatFanBananaBan, and they have this blog here about the psychology of Jason Todd and bringing about certain excerpts from a book that was written by Travis Langley, a professor of psychology at Henderson State University. And this one excerpt is very fascinating. It says, Jason redefines himself to be like others. At different points in his life, he replaces Dick Grayson as Robin, assumes the Joker's old Red Hood identity, dons the Nightwing costume and name, trapezes the multiverse in the costume of Earth 51 Batman's late partner, Red Robin, and tries to win the right to wear the Batman's cowl when Batman is presumed to be dead. After Dick becomes the true Batman with Damian Wayne as Robin, Jason transforms his Red Hood outfit into a more traditional superhero costume and gets his own sidekick, a girl called Scarlet, which we'll explain a bit more in detail a bit later, because I do have a bit of a controversial opinion about that story arc. Later, as Bruce resumes his place as Gotham's one and only Batman, Jason follows and distorts another chapter of Bruce's life when he leads the Outlaws, an anti-hero equivalent of the Outsider super team Batman sometimes leads. Jason's repeated efforts to recast himself to fit other people's molds shows us similarities to borderline personality disorder, a condition involving a vague, poorly turned and formed identity. While Jason may be too consistent in his acts, manner, and moods to fit that particular disorder well, spending much of his youth brain damaged and comatose has made him miss out on a critical personality development. Jason's defining moments, the events we always think of in connection with him, as a boy stealing tires from the Batmobile, and a clown, the same clown who shot the commissioner's daughter, later beating the boy to death with a crowbar. Just as readers cannot leave these moments behind, Jason, with no powerful redefining moments, also surely never will. So this guy here literally saw the future and saw that all roads led to stagnation, and that is exactly where Jason is at this very moment. But as I was rereading this excerpt, it really got me thinking how he is literally the inverse of Dick Grayson. Dick Grayson has so many different roles and like positions that he's put himself in, that he's been very successful in, that he is literally the man of many faces. We've seen it in the Grayson run as Agent 37. He's been Robin, he's been Nightwing, he's been Batman, he's been an agent of Spiral, he's even been a trapeze artist under the Flying Grayson's, title, right? That entire show. He's been all of these things, yet he's been consistent to himself, but also changes for the better. Red Hood, he tries to change a lot, but every single time he fails, he's kind of like an inverse version of Nightwing, and that's what makes him possibly one of the most unfortunate cases of a character progressing too soon, because Red Hood should have stayed the enemy of Dick Grayson for a long time. In fact, after the Battle for the Cowl storyline where Nightwing was victorious over Jason in having the Batman mantle, we see him actually set out to become his arch nemesis. He reworks his costume, as I mentioned before, to have a more Joker-esque style reminiscent globe on his head, the one that looks like the same one from The Killing Joke, and he ends up taking upon himself a sidekick named Scarlet, who was the daughter of a criminal and a victim of Professor Pig. She was a Dollatron who he took under his wing, and it's really wholesome to see because she is his heart. the personification that he is not a bad person. He does have goodness within him. He takes care of her as if she was his own sister, and it's beautiful to see, but he does resume his very brutal and violent crusade on crime, but this time with a twist. He uses the media and the internet, and it's very interesting because he videotapes himself, his rhetoric, his methodology, his fights, and he actually gets a bit of the public opinion onto his side and a bit in his favor because he shows Batman and Robin protecting the Penguin even after all that he's done. He actually has a call here. He says, "Call now if you want to see the dynamic duo unmasked as nature intended." And this was when he had both of them under wraps and tied up. And it's cool here because he has a phone number very reminiscent to when the readers, us, the viewers, called to have him killed. Of course, if you have this 1-800 number, he will survive his fight with the Joker. If you call the other one, he will die. And the voters actually voted for him to live, but it was rigged and it led to him going, and the rest was history. This is the little callbacks that I love with Morrison's writing that makes everything seem a lot more planned out and better from a recontextualized standpoint. And one scene that I want to point out here is how he does some parallels with the Killing Joke. Jason was supposed to be Dick's Joker because he has a moment here when he says, "I could rehabilitate you," just as Batman did to Joker at the end of the Killing Joke. And Jason replies in a very similar way with very similar facial patterns and hand gestures. He says, "Help me. It's too late for me, Grayson. It was always too late for me. Don't you get it? I tried really hard to be what Batman wanted me to be, which was you, but this world, this dirty, twisted, cruel, and ugly dung heap of a world had other plans for me, and it's not done just yet. Just remember tonight, I did something even Batman couldn't do. I beat my arch enemy," which of course was Flamingo, an assassin going after his head, and he kind of reframes it as if Grayson Bats wasn't his main prize. This right here I think was the last peak of Jason as an anti-villain. After that, everything goes south. The only thing they could have done to make this work was to place him in his own city as Red Hood and make him a Punisher-like character, but with a bit more mysticism, of course bringing in the All Blades mythology, and to have him as a demon hunter and the Prince of Gotham, somebody who is a crime lord working on two fronts. That would have been really cool, but they kind of threw it all away. Jason right now possibly couldn't be in an even worse position, and if you look at the DCKO leaks, you know that he is going to lose in his fight to Joker. He is in the worst possible position. Oh my goodness, bro. Never ever like Jason Todd ever again. Let that be a lesson to all of you. If this guy is your Oshi, then you need to invest in another career, because I would not want to put any stocks in a man named Jason Todd. But what do you guys think? What do you think should be done to Jason to improve his character? Do you believe he was better as an anti-villain, anti-hero, or even a full-on hero? Do you believe his progression to being a hero is even valid and should have happened in the first place? I believe it should have, but it should have taken place over a long series, maybe 2-3 years in an ongoing run by Judd Winnick or somebody else, where they really go into his psychology and they do a full-on character study. It could have been done, and he could have been accepted into the Bat family with open arms, and there wouldn't have been this much back and forth with him going over the line and eventually being stopped by the Bat family, and then coming back to them and them acting like nothing happened. Even looking at the second to last arc of Batman and Robin by Judd Winnick, you could tell that he was ready, or possibly ready, to go down that path. There was moments where he was working with Damian and Dick to save Scarlet, telling us that his heart was now in a better place, even though he did end up doing a full mass murder on a group of prisoners. Granted, they were trying to kill him, so it was mostly kind of in self-defense. A lot of them didn't do anything to him, and they were just collateral. But it really was just to show a message, and you can have both Jasons, the compassionate one and the completely psychotic one, and that would lead to a very interesting character. But yeah, guys, that's all there is from me, and in the corner here on the left or right, you will see a video, two videos, one on the downfall of Tim Drake and another one on how Nightwing is a more flawed character than we give him credit for. He is a lot more interesting than a lot of people think he is. And let me know down below if you want me to talk about the last Robin, Damian Wayne, or even Stephanie Brown, even though she was Robin for the total amount of like 4, 5, 6 issues. But yeah, see you all later. Take care. Deuces. Peace.